Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. I'm the Executive Director of Churches for Middle East Peace, and today is Saturday, December 30th. Today is day 85 since the Hamas attacks on South Israel on October 7th. In terms of what's happened in the last 24 hours, Congress once again was bypassed as the Biden administration has sent more weapons to Israel. The Associated Press reported for the second time this month, the Biden administration bypassed Congress by approving emergency weapons in a sale to Israel that will be used in Israel's war against Hamas. This has, of course, received criticism. And as you know, the international community is increasingly criticizing Israel's actions in Gaza because of the devastating impact on civilians. So on Friday, yesterday, the State Department announced that Secretary of State Blinken told Congress that he had made a second emergency determination. The amount of the sale is for $147.5 million that will be used for equipment, including fuses, charges, and primers that are needed to make the 155 millimeter shells that Israel has purchased for use. The State Department said, given the urgency of Israel's defensive needs, the secretary notified Congress that he had exercised his delegated authority to determine that an emergency existed, necessitating the immediate approval of the transfer. The United States is committed to the security of Israel and to its vital U.S. national interest to ensure that Israel is able to defend itself. Of course, I would encourage you. We previously did a webinar in December on U.S. complicity with Israel's bombing of Gaza, which we at Churches for Middle East Peace have identified as an ethnic cleansing. Many are saying it's a genocide. The Biden administration has been accused of being complicit in the genocidal actions of the Israeli government. So this action of sending more weapons and bypassing Congress is deeply disconcerting. I also wanted to call your attention. The New York Times came out with a harrowing report about violence against women on October 7th by Hamas. I read the report in detail. It was so horrific. My husband said, he couldn't even finish reading the article. The report talks about how often in times of violent conflict, there's a lack of material evidence. But the two primary ways that sexual violence is investigated in this particular case is via video footage and by the account of witnesses. And there have been prolific amounts of video footage because many of the attackers who were killed, that video footage has since been made available, some of it publicly, much of it privately, either to the media. I do know people within our networks who've been invited to private viewings of some of the video footage. We also know that female hostages who have been released have been talking about the fear of being raped, the fear of sexual assault when they were held by Hamas as well. And for each and every woman that has had that type of experience, or in this particular case, was traumatized, there are no words. We must condemn violence against women, and in any and every circumstance, violence against women being used as a weapon of war is abhorrent and must be condemned. And any actions that include the brutalization or violence against women as an act of terror or a weapon of war must be unequivocally condemned. My heart goes out to the women who have survived that, to family members who are aware that their women women who are a part of their family had those experiences. Prayers to those families. No victims have spoken publicly about their experiences, according to reports coming from Israel, and Hamas has continued to reject accusations of rape and sexual violence during October 7th and is saying that that is unfounded lies. I also wanted to call your attention. The Intercept published an article just a few days ago about that same situation and made two primary arguments. Their first was they said that it was not true that the United Nations and that others covered up accounts of rape and sexual mutilation. They said that it's not true that accounts were ignored or covered up by the UN Gender Equality Organization or by Western feminists and global human rights organizations and US progressives, but rather, while some individuals and extreme left organizations denied those atrocities or upheld them as justified resistance, they said it is not the UN Women's role to make day after condemnations on unverified acts of violence against women, but rather verifying such acts, particularly amid the chaos of war, takes a long time. The Intercept also argued, this was their second point, that the scandal that unfolded in early December was largely manufactured by right-wing pundits who until this moment did not give a fig about rape, end quote. The article talked about the role that Fox News played in falsely equivocating, supporting the horrific acts of violence against women and Palestinian rights. And I just want to be very clear that we at Churches for Middle East Peace condemn all horrific acts of violence, any violence, and also violence against women, that these accounts must not be ignored. And we also call on all political leaders, regardless of their perspective, to not capitalize on the trauma of these women and the families of those victimized and affected, to politicize those horrific actions. A few other updates. The head of the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees accused Israeli soldiers of firing at an aid convoy in Gaza in the last 24 hours. NBC also reported that many Palestinians are fleeing central Gaza, where Israeli artillery and warplanes have been pounding refugee camps there. We also know that more than 21,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, and Al Jazeera reported that that number includes more than 8,000 of whom are children, more than 8,000 children killed in Gaza since October 7th. The Israeli military says that more than 167 soldiers have been killed during the country's ground invasion in Gaza. And more than 100 hostages continue to be held. Yesterday, Israel reported that an army captain, Harold Sharvit, 33, was killed in combat and that others were wounded. And I just wanted to note, a very dear friend of mine who's an Orthodox rabbi in Israel, he's incredibly committed to Palestinian human rights, to ending the occupation. He is a peace activist. His son is currently serving in the Israeli military, and I've been in touch with him regularly since October 7th. His son just began serving. He is now serving in Gaza. And this past week, his commander and several of the men in his unit were killed. And while we at Churches for Middle East Peace are calling for a ceasefire, I want us to keep in mind that not only have there been thousands and thousands of Palestinian deaths, but these young men and women who are Israeli, who are serving in the military, many of them are torn between what it means to be a faithful citizen. And many of them also are not supportive of Netanyahu, or not all of them, and I'm not, but many of them are so young. And I just want us to always keep in mind that the death of anyone is an atrocity and a tragedy and a trauma. And so as we pray for peace and as we call for an end to violence, let's keep in mind all of those who have been killed in Palestine, in Gaza, but let's also keep in mind Israelis who have lost loved ones as well, even as we are calling for the war to be brought to an end. And even as we're identifying the bombing and ground invasion of Gaza as an ethnic cleansing. We're now 85 days into Israel's war against Hamas, and more than 20,000 Palestinians have been killed, more than 1,200 Israelis killed. Today, there are more than 100 hostages still held in Gaza. The majority of the population in Gaza, approaching 2 million people displaced. The vast majority are suffering severe humanitarian challenges, the lack of access to clean water, food, basic needs, let alone medical care. The realities of suffering are extreme, and this violence must be brought to an end. It is catastrophic. And CMEP continues to call for a comprehensive ceasefire, an end to all violence, a return of the hostages, immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance, that the core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be addressed. They have been put off for more than half a century. The occupation must be brought to an end. The siege on Gaza must be brought to an end. If you love Israel, call for a comprehensive ceasefire. If you want freedom for the Palestinian people, call for a ceasefire. If you want to advocate for women and children and those who've been held hostage to be returned home, call for a ceasefire. If you want to speak out against U.S. complicity in the arming and bombing of millions of people in Gaza, call for a ceasefire. A ceasefire and an end to war and violence is the only answer. So thank you for working with us as together we continue to call for peace.